Intro.
Development of biological oceanography. So to begin with, biological oceanography is the study of flora and fauna of the ocean. So as we all know, flora is the plant life occurring in a particular region or time, while fauna are those it includes all the animals. So since we are in a biological oceanography, we are talking about marine organisms or marine animals. So, human interest in the biology of the oceans can be traced back to observations made in the 4th century before Christ by Aristotle. So, it was Aristotle who described and nagkatalog ng 180 species of marine animals. So, the great sea-going expeditions of the 15th and 16th centuries increased geographical knowledge of the oceans and added incidental observations on biology. But modern studies on the biology of the oceans did not really start until in the middle of the 19th century. So we have the first man, which is a British naturalist named Edward Forbes. He is often credited with being a founding father of oceanography, as he was one of the first person to conduct systematically designed studies of the marine biota. So he pioneered in the use of a dredge for obtaining samples of benthic marine animals, and he recognized that different species occupy different depth zones. So may book siya which is entitled The Natural History of the European Seas, and was published 5 years ago after his death. So at the same time, lumabas din yung book ni Darwin na The Origin of Species. So unfortunately, Forbes is often remembered for the 1843 publication of his azoic hypothesis. So he claimed doon that marine organisms it did not exist daw sa lalim na 550 meters. But Forbes was unaware na before that, in 1818, John Ross had already obtained bottom samples containing worms and starfish from about 1,920 meter in Wappen Bay, west of Greenland. So, yung nephew din ni John Ross na si James Ross, nagled ng expedition to the Antarctic in 1839 to 1843, and he collected benthic animals from as deep as 730 meters. So, complete opposite doon sa gina-claim ni Edward Forbes in his azoic hypothesis na wala daw naga-exist na marine organisms sa 550 meters. So, the reason why the hypothesis or the claim of Mr. Edward Forbes was being refuted. So, in 1860, when a submarine cable was brought up for repair from more than 1,830 meter and was found to have encrusting animals growing on it, so also mas na-refute yung claim ni Edward Forbes. So, after Edward Forbes was Charles Weevil Thompson. So, he became as Forbes' successor as Professor of Natural Philosophy at the University of Edinburgh. So in 1873, he published one of the first texts of oceanography, The Depths of the Sea, based on a review of early expeditions. So Thompson also became organizer and leader of the first oceanographic expedition to circumnavigate the world. This was the Challenger expedition. So the Challenger expedition of the year 1872 to 1876 traveled 110,900 kilometers, visiting all the major oceans except for the Arctic. So the expedition was organized by the Royal Society. Specifically, yung purpose niya is to survey the ocean with respect to their physical features, chemistry, and biology. So the ship was a British naval sailing vessels with auxiliary steam specially outfitted for scientific work. So, besides Thompson, mayroon ding two other naturalists who completed the journey. So the two other naturalists completed the journey, or they are together with the Challenger expedition, was Henry N. Moseley. So he was described as an indefatigable scientist and an enthusiastic amateur artist who contributed many drawings to the final official report. So Moseley wrote a book following the Challenger expedition, Notes by a Naturalist on HMS Challenger, where he describes all the areas the ship visited, so the birds, botany, landscape, and culture. Although the voyage's primary aim was science under the sea, there was also attention paid to the land and the people the crew met. So Moseley wrote the report on certain hydroid, Alcionarian, and Madreporian corals. And also, John Murray, a Canadian-born Scotsman, carried out his duties as a naturalist and later was instrumental in publishing the result of the voyage. So, John Murray also financed the publication of their reports. So, even though marami ng mga information yung nagalabas about the ocean, before pa the Challenger expedition still had been collected incidentally or in bits and pieces by individual scientists, yung mga marine organisms. So the Challenger voyage attempted to integrate biology, chemistry, geology, and physical phenomena, and it established systematic data collection using standardized methods. So for this reason, the Challenger expeditions is considered to mark the beginning of modern oceanography. So over 76 scientists analyzed the collections made during the voyage, and it took 19 years before all 50 volumes of final reports were published. So it is under the direction and financial support of John Murray. So the expedition produced a basic map of the seafloor and proved without doubt the existence of life at great depths. The biological samples yielded 715 new genera and 4,417 new species of marine organisms. 3,508 of them were new species of Radiolaria, a group of protozoans. So all of this have been described by the great German biologist Ernest Haeckel. So as we can see in the picture, the 1 and 2 are the Archaicapsa, the 3 to 6 are the Halicapsa, the 7 is the Platybursa, 8 is Clathrobursa, 9 to 10 is Archaipera, 11 to 12 is Archaicenium, 13 is Cladocenium, 14 to 16 is Pterocenium, 17 to 18 is Acrocorona, and 19 to 20 is Tetracorythra. So all of this in the figure are new species, are included in those new species of Radiolaria, or a group of protozoan that have been collected by the Challenger expedition. So all of this have been described by Ernest Haeckel. So one of the contribution of Challenger expedition was the discovery of the Bathybius Haeckeli, its true nature. So it was described by Thomas Huxley in 1868. So when we say Bathybius, it is a thin layer of mucus-like jelly covering the surface of preserved mud samples, and Huxley believed that it represented a primordial living slime which carpeted the deep sea floor. So this organism, however, proved to be a precipitate of calcium sulfate, the result of mixing alcohol with seawater to preserve bottom samples. So after the Challenger, many other expeditions followed its path, and a few of those that made major contribution to biological oceanography are in the table. So before that, in 1910 and in 1912, John Murray went on to organize the Michael Sars expedition, and he co-authored a classic text in General Oceanography, The Depths of the Ocean, with Johan H. Chort, a Norwegian scientist. So this table is the major biological oceanographic expedition. So one of it is the Challenger vessel, which has the major objectives of global biological collections, existence of life in deepest waters, and the National in 1889 plankton collections, and the deepest manned dive the 10,916-meter Mariana Trench by the vessel Trieste or Batascafe in 1960. So, even before the time of the Challenger, may mga tao na rin na nag-conduct ng work or ng studies about marine plankton. So, the first person reported to have studied marine plankton was a surgeon and amateur naturalist J. Vaughan Thompson, who towed a simple fine meshed net to collect plankton off the coast of Ireland in 1828. So, his studies resulted in the first description of the planktonic stages of crabs. So, let's take for an example the blue crab life cycle. So, as you can see, the stage 1 is the zea or the larvae. So, adult blue crabs lived in estuaries, areas such as Pamlico Sound where salt water and fresh water mix. When the eggs are ready to hatch, the female migrates to mouth of the estuary. The eggs hatch and become zea or larvae. So upon hatching, larvae are less than 1 millimeter and carried by currents out to sea, where they will spend the next 30 to 45 days in this life stage. So, stage 2 is the megalopa or the post-larvae. So, after 7 to 8 larvae stages and 30 to 45 days, larvae metamorphoses or change into to become a megalopa, which are 1 to 3 millimeters. So, at the megalopal stage, blue crabs use light, turbulence, and salinity to tell them when to swim upward in the water, where they are carried by the tides at night into the estuaries. So, the life stages 3 and 4 is the juvenile and adult. So, once the megalopa finds a suitable habitat to settle, usually in the seagrass, they metamorphose into juvenile, which are 3 millimeter and larger. So, juveniles will not molt or shed their outer shell numerous times to grow into adults, which can grow to 120 millimeter or more, and they are sexually mature. So aside from Mr. J. Vaughan Thompson, we have Charles Darwin, who also used a similar net to collect marine plankton during his stint as an unpaid and seasick naturalist on the voyage of the Beagle from 1831 to 1836. So, in 1847, it was also Joseph Hooker who recognized that the diatoms collected in plankton nets were plants, and he suggested that they played the same ecological role in the sea as green plants do on land. So, however, in 1887, the term plankton was defined by Victor Henson, so a professor at Kiel University who also led the first oceanographic expedition entirely devoted to quantitative collections of the plankton. So the word plankton was more critically defined in 1890 by Ernest Haeckel, and today the word encompasses all drifting organisms including plants or the phytoplankton, animals or the zooplankton, and bacteria or the bacterioplankton. So much for that. Let us move on to marine and oceanographic laboratories that was made in 1800s to early 1900s. So many of which were founded by biologists. So in Europe, the German zoologist Anton Dorn established the Station Zoologica di Napoli in 1872. So this station was unique at that time in that its facilities were available to visiting scientists from other countries. So the Marine Biological Association of the United Kingdom started a laboratory in Plymouth, England in 1888. In 1906, Prince Albert I of Monaco established an oceanographic museum and aquarium to house extensive collection made by his research ships. So in America, Louis Agassiz, the father of Alexander Agassiz, established the first marine biological laboratory on the East Coast in 1873. So this was later, 1818, moved to Woods Hole, where it became the Marine Biological Laboratory. So during this period, Spencer Baird started the first of a series of laboratories devoted to fisheries studies in Woods Hole, and in 1930, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution was officially established. So on the west coast of America, William Ritter, so he was a student of Alexander Agassiz, founded a research organization in 1905 that eventually in 1924 became the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in La Jolla, California. So now almost all countries bordering the ocean have oceanographic or fisheries stations. So, in 1902, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, or the ICES, was established under the auspices of King Oscar II of Sweden. So, this organization, they attempted to integrate physical studies of the ocean with biological investigation of fish. But this was not completely successful. ICES proved unable to force effective legislation concerning control of endangered stocks or overfishing, and the organization was not as innovative in developing new fishing techniques and discovering new fisher stocks as the fishermen themselves. So after the war, ICES sponsored cooperative expedition in the North Sea and North Atlantic, paid for by the national institution in each participating country. So, diminishing stocks of exploited species have alerted fishery scientists to the appreciation that the abundance of fish in the oceans is not only related to the numbers of fish removed, but is also greatly influenced by ocean climate. So, a relatively new field known as fisheries oceanography has developed, which attempts to relate oceanographic data to fluctuation in fish stocks. So, during the World War II, there is a what we called sonar, which have been developed to detect enemy submarines, and it was later employed to study the topography of the seafloor, find fish schools, and most recently to locate and follow concentration of larger zooplankton. So submarines and scuba diving became more sophisticated, and now both are used to obtain in observations of marine life. So underwater sound recording with hydrophones is now employed to study communication in marine mammals and the echolocation of prey by mammals and some fish. So, biological oceanography began as a descriptive science and basic observation on the biology of marine organisms and their environment. So, it continues to be an important aspect of ocean. Modern oceanography began with the Challenger expedition between 1872 and 1876. So it was the first expedition organized specifically to gather data on a wide range of ocean features, including ocean temperatures, seawater chemistry, currents, marine life, and the geology of the seafloor. So nowadays, there are computers who have greatly decreased the time needed to analyze data routinely, and they are useful tools in simulating oceanographic events. So the development of satellites and remote sensing has made it possible to map the ocean temperature and to trace ocean currents. So, as human impacts on the ocean increase, an expanding base of knowledge about the ecology of the seas becomes essential to address questions of exploitation and pollution with more certainty. So, that would be all on this topic. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you've learned something about my report.